Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Vern Glenn.
Sup, America?
And Bruce McGowan.
Nice to be here.
Yeah, we are in the studio. Actually, he's on the phone. Brian Toohey is calling all the way from Chicago, Illinois, where it's sunny and about 12 degrees or something. And he's the author of The Fix Is In to discuss how sports are rigged.
Chicago,
Brian.
bang, bang.
Dang it.
Oh, my goodness.
Welcome, Brian.
Hey, thanks for having me on, guys. I appreciate it.
So, first of all, tell us how the weather really is back there.
You were close. You're a little too warm, but otherwise you were a little warm.
Well, it was good enough to chase away the Dallas Cowboys the other night. Woo, man!
You see that catch?
Oh, my gosh.
How's it going?
Bears just tore him up.
So, Brian, talk to us about how sports are rigged.
Well, it depends which way you want to talk about them being rigged. I wrote one book, The Fix Is In, which is about how I believe the leagues manipulate their own games to achieve certain outcomes for television ratings. And then I wrote a second book, which just came out, called Larceny Games, which is about how organized crime and gamblers have basically gotten players and referees to shave points and fix games in that realm.
Well, I thought that was all over at the 1919 scandal. No?
Oh, no. No, just ask Paul Hornung about that.
Yeah.
That this sort of thing doesn't happen in United States sports, especially in professional sports.
Yeah, really.
That baseball says it's never happened since 1919.
Sure.
Hockey hasn't had such a scandal since the 40s. The NBA hasn't had one since 1954. And if you can believe it, the NFL says this has never happened in our league ever.
Oh, yeah, right, yeah.
When basketball, you had it with the referee. What was his name?
Oh, the guy,
Donahue.
Donahue. Yeah.
Well, the problem with Donahue is although he's arrested and sent to jail, they were on gambling charges, not on point shaving or fixing charges. And neither the FBI nor the NBA actually wanted to go after him for that sort of crime because the FBI knew they would have an incredibly hard time proving that, in fact, he shaved points. And the NBA didn't want anybody to find out that he did shave points because then that could have meant certain outcomes in the playoffs. And in regards to, draft picks and that sort of thing might have been altered because of Donahue's actions.
Well, at least with Pete Rose, he bet on his own team. That's a little different.
No. Another aspect that bothers me, too, is when people bring that up. Here's the thing with Rose, and it's the same even with Paul Hornung, who him and Alex Karras were the only two guys from the NFL ever to be banned for gambling. Hornung was supposedly just gambling on the Packers to win the team. Now, take Rose, for example. If he was betting as a coach, which he finally admitted to after 20 years of lying, when he's playing, for example, he's playing the Cubs, Chicago Cubs, and they have a 3-game series. If in game 1 he bets on his own team to win, and it's a tight game, he would use his bullpen more readily and burn through more pitchers to ensure he won that game because he wanted to cover his bets than normal. So then come game 2, if he bet on the Reds again, and the same thing happened, he'd burn through the other half of his bullpen. Well, come game 3, he wouldn't bet on the Reds because he knew his bullpen was burnt. And that was not only a tip to the bookies he was dealing with, who knew that they were booking Pete Rose's bets to go ahead and bet against the Reds, bet on the Cubs in this example. It also meant that he really manipulated all 3 games.
That's a very good. I never thought about it. Of course, nobody ever bets on the Cubs, but I get your point though.
Hey, you know what? For the listener or for the viewer that just doesn't know exactly, maybe they just know that Pete Rose, bet on baseball. How was it ever found out?
And Rose was, well, the interesting thing with Rose is he was actually investigated, and few people don't realize this. He was investigated for gambling on baseball when he was a player back in the late 60s and early 70s. And they suspected that he was betting with a bookie, but they couldn't prove it because Rose was smart enough not to make the bets himself. He would use what they call a beard. He would have somebody else bet the game for him. So baseball investigated for a few years, couldn't prove anything. And then when this came up when he was a manager, which really came out because he was actually betting with a steroid dealer, believe it or not, in the pre-steroid era.
Curtis
And
Strong
that guy
was
got
that the
busted
guy?
by the feds, and he rolled over on Rose. And then the feds kind of gave Major League Baseball this information. Baseball couldn't go back to their old investigation because they threw all those notes and records away.
Wasn't it a guy named...
So they had to reinvestigate them, and that's how all this finally came out.
I didn't interrupt you. I was going to say, wasn't it a guy named Curtis Strong somehow involved? He was very upset with Rose and wanted to get back at him, and there was a little, kind of a ratting out. Isn't that kind of how it went?
And that was part of it too. Exactly. That he thought Rose was his buddy, and when he got in trouble, Rose was nowhere to be found, so he got angry, and there was kind of a revenge type of deal where he went after Rose and turned over on him because Rose should be.
Yeah, my question, though, real quickly, Brian, is what's the motivation of players today who realize they have a short life in this game, they're making probably pretty good money, and they're going to risk it all to throw a game to make a few extra bucks? I just don't see it. I mean, I can see it happening in isolated situations, but not endemic, a problem that's an epidemic problem. And again, maybe I'm being naive, but I just know a lot of athletes, and I hang around a lot of pro athletes, and these guys aren't going to me, 95% of them are not going to risk their careers just to make a quick payoff if they're making big money to begin with.
Yeah, but they're not all making big
No,
money,
but
Bruce.
they
Yeah,
are.
but if you're like the
Today
ninth,
they are.
yeah, but if you're the 9th or 10th guy on the bench,
But you're
okay,
still
you're
making
making
those 9th to 10th guys in the benches are still making over $2 million. Why would you? And I'm just asking. I'm playing devil's advocate here, Brian. Why would you risk?
Well, what if you're making the minimum?
Okay, I mean, but how many? What's the minimum?
Or what if you're in college and you're just kind of like not thinking about like Johnny Manziel? Yeah, no big deal. Just sign.
Well, my question is how widespread is this? Do you think it's something that's epidemic? Is it something that's too common and we should get rid of it, or is it just isolated?
Well, the problem is nobody knows, and that's the big scary issue.
Yeah.
Nobody has a clue how endemic it may or may not be because no one's looking for this. I mean, I'm the only person in probably 20 years who has written a book on this type of subject matter. I mean, despite all the sports writers and sports journalists out there, nobody's willing to touch the subject matter. Nobody accessed the FBI records that I did to write larceny games. I mean, that kind of information is out there, but no one's seeking it out. So if nobody's looking for it, if no one's willing to ask the question, you're never going to get any answers out of it.
Do you have to look over your shoulder a lot?
Yeah, but yeah. You got guys eyeballing you.
Sleep with one
The
eye open.
original question as to why or how somebody would fix a game, despite the fact that some of these athletes, like you say, are kind of untouchable. I mean, certain guys, Peyton Manning, Tom Brady, LeBron James, would they be the type of guys to fix a game?
No.
Probably not. And I don't think a lot of guys are the type of guys to fix games. But at the same time, you look at somebody like Allen Iverson or Antoine Walker, guys who made $100 million or more contractually in the NBA and blew it all by the time they were out of the league. Okay? These are guys who made $100 million and went through it all. Now, here's the guy at the end of his career who may be willing, if he's greedy enough, to say, look, I just went through $100 million. I need to make a little extra scratch. What if I bet on this game? What if I bet on these few games and I could make some of this money back tax-free without having to pay my agent, my manager, taxes, or any of the other things that clipped off my $100 million as well? I think then there's a little temptation there. Plus, I think you can get the athletes the way organized crime has got to people all over this country is through their weaknesses.
Yeah, and if you're the point guard,
if you have a player who has a drug problem, if you have a player who has a gambling problem, maybe a player even who's homosexual, who isn't out of the closet, so to speak. Those are guys that and there's people out there who look for this sort of information. If you find out about this sort of thing and you can utilize it to your advantage, then you can get somebody to fix a game. It may not be something where you can get a guy for an entire season to fix a game.
It's intriguing.
Here and there, sure, I think it's actually easier to occur than most people would assume.
so if you're the point guard, you can control the flow of the play. So you throw an errant pass. If you're the third string guard, you miss a block.
Exactly. But you're not going to bet on your own team. You'll bet on the other team.
Right.
Throw the game. Okay,
Right.
Brian, stay with us. We're going to get to a commercial break. We're in the studio here.
Interesting
on the phone
stuff.
with Brian Toohey, the author of The Fix Is In. He's discussing with us about how sports are rigged. Okay, our trivia questions again have to do with NFL coaches. All right, you guys ready?
Oh, bring it on.
All right, bring it on. Okay, although this coach never saw a Super Bowl, of course, he probably watched on TV, he was the 1974 Coach of the Year for his services with the Cardinals. Hint, this was in 1980 and 1981. He took the Chargers to 2 AFC championship games, and lost them both. Okay, who was this coach? First three callers with the correct answer win a free 3-day, 2-night stay at the Lighthouse Resort. Their website is lighthouse4fun.com. I think the hint helped you guys, didn't it? Okay, so here's the question. Although this coach never saw a Super Bowl, he was the 1974 Coach of the Year for his services with the Cardinals. And the hint is, in 1980 and 81, he took the Chargers to 2 AFC championship games, but lost them both. Who was this coach? 888-660-4495. Make sure to include your name and your email address. Speak slowly, spell out one letter at a time, your email. Don't touch that dial. Sports Econ 101. We'll be right back.
Don Coryell, right?
Yeah,
That is Don
man.
Coryell.
Eric
Coryell.
It
Yeah.
looked like he was having some kind of a
Is he
stomach
still with
cramp.
us?
I I think he is.
so.
Is he?
I think so. He was a good coach. I mean,
Just
the
never
Chargers
been
should
the
have
big
gone
one.
to
Like
the Super
Sean and I
Bowl
were
a
just
couple of
never
times.
could win the big one.
No, they couldn't.
Dan Fouts would agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, the game, the real heartbreaker was 1981. They went to Cincinnati, and the temperature was like 5 degrees, and they lost something like 26-3. It was the
Warm
same,
weather team.
Yeah,
Exactly.
it was the same day the Niners won on the Dwight Clark catch, because I remember watching the game in the press
that's
box.
right.
I was sitting next to Monty Stickles that day. God, what a character he was.
Mm-hmm.
What a piece of work.
Is he still around?
No, he died about 5 years ago. Monty got kind of heavy, and he was a drinker, and I think he wasn't that young. He was about 70, but he croaked. He had a heart attack and just. But he was really smart. He invested his money in real estate, so he had about 4 or 5.
How good is it doing him now?
Yeah,
Well, yeah, really.
yeah, that's true. He was a piece of work, though. He worked at KGO for a long time, radio and TV, mostly radio.
Okay, when we come back, Brian, you tell us some more good tidbits?
Sure.
Okay, excellent.
Whatever you want.
All right, okay. Here we go. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Vern Glenn. You're not going to say anything this time, okay?
He's a man of few words.
And Bruce McGowan.
Oh, yes.
And we're in the studio on the phone with Brian Toohey, who's the author of The Fix Is In, and talking about how sports are rigged. But let's go to the first commercial breaks trivia question. Although this coach never saw a Super Bowl, he was the 1974 Coach of the Year for his services with the Cardinals. And the hint was 1980 and 81, he took the Chargers to 2 AFC championships, but lost the fun.
And they should have won both of them,
They should have
or at
won
least
both.
one of them.
Yeah. Who was it?
He was a good coach.
Eric
Coryell.
Coryell.
Don
Don Coryell.
Always looked like he was having a stomach problem or something. He always had this angry look on his face.
Because he was with the Chargers.
Yeah.
They kept losing the big one.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, how
Dan Fouts, Dan Fouts, San Francisco native. Tough.
St.
bosses.
Ignatius.
St.
Yep.
Ignatius High in San Francisco.
I like Fouts.
Good guy.
Oh, yeah.
Good guy.
I
Yeah,
guess
he lives up in Oregon now. Lives up in Bend, Oregon. Yeah.
He was a great quarterback.
Great quarterback.
Okay, Brian, teach us some more
I
about.
knew the answer, by the way.
Oh, did you? Good.
You're
Okay.
done.
Well, you know what?
It was quiet.
Okay, that's okay. Well, you know what? I'm going to give you we'll let you answer the next one at the next break here. Okay.
I
So
might not know that one.
you can tell us after the fact. Okay. So Brian is on the phone. Brian Toohey, who wrote the book "The Fix Is In," and he's discussing how sports are rigged. What else do you want to share with us?
I think to think about the fact that our sports may be, in fact, be influenced by whatever, if you want to call it the NFL itself, or by gamblers, or what have you, you kind of need some sort of evidence. And I think the best evidence we have today, which many people, I think, in America don't even realize, is the epidemic of soccer match fixing going on around the world. And this is something that has literally touched every continent. It's happened in Canada, it's happened all over South America and Africa, especially in Europe, in the Far East and Asia, where soccer matches, tennis matches, and cricket matches as well have been fixed and have been influenced by gamblers, by organized crime. And the soccer entities like FIFA are really powerless to stop it right now.
Yeah, Pablo Escobar, man. He had those powerful, the drug lord, had those powerful soccer teams.
Well, can you imagine being like for the country of Colombia,
Oh.
and you're asked to throw a game?
Well,
you're going to die one way or the
dude
other.
was killed, right?
Yeah, that's right. The guy on the Colombian team was actually shot to death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the one where he accidentally hit it in his own goal?
I'm not
Or
sure
they just
what
lost?
happened.
But can you imagine having gangsters come to you and say you better throw the game, but then if you throw the game, you're gonna get killed.
Yeah.
That's not a
Catch
good
22.
position.
Pick your poison.
Yeah.
Not a good situation. But it's intriguing to me, Brian, because I'm always thinking of guys that are, as Vernon was mentioning, fringe players, guys. But the fringe players, of course, are not going to have as much influence. But if they get in that particular game, are they going to want to risk the chance of, maybe getting a little bit more notoriety just to make a quick payoff? I don't know. I mean, it's possible. Certainly it's possible.
Like I say, when you look at soccer, that's where I think you can see this sort of evidence, because they've gotten to guys and they've fixed Olympic soccer matches.
Wow.
They've fixed World Cup soccer matches, which is the biggest sporting event in the world, and they've gotten to teams and gotten them to lay down.
In recent years?
And that's been proven?
Yes, as recently as the last World Cup.
Wow.
Really? Wow.
Whoa.
Well, no, you know what?
I mean, it's going on, like I say, it's going on in Europe right now. It's everywhere. I mean, Europol, which is the European, police union, they announced earlier in 2013 that as many as 687 soccer matches had been fixed.
Oh my God.
Jeez.
Well, wasn't it women's gymnastics where the refs were getting coerced?
Mm.
Remember that with the scoring?
Vaguely, but yeah, that's such
Well,
a.
they've done it. I mean, they did it in badminton at the.
Yeah, oh, that badminton. That's right. They did that too.
Yeah, they threw it so they could get a better draw.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, they say greed is the root of all evil, and there's no question that greed motivates everybody to a degree, with rare exception, and athletes are no exception.
Hey, how are these athletes even contacted, Brian? I mean, is it just I know a guy who knows a guy who knows her, and then they chance meeting, they run into him? How does it even happen?
Well, and like what they've done in soccer is there's actually it sounds exaggerated, but they literally have a worldwide network of criminals who are doing this, who are going around and getting to players and referees and paying them off
Putting that on Craigslist.
soccer matches. I mean, it's basically like Yakuza in Japan. They're starting to influence games. There's other criminal organizations in Singapore and China that are out there literally spanning the globe to fix these games.
And can you mention
But here in the United States, I think a lot of it had to do with organized crime and those sorts of gamblers and bookies. Where, yeah, I mean, a lot of times with like the New York Yankees, a lot of the New York Yankee players, especially in the 60s, 50s, they hung around with members of organized crime. It was kind of like the cool hip places to be seen were the same places the mafia guys were hanging out, so they got to know each other.
You know who?
I mean, I had FBI reports that talked about the organized crime guys giving, Joe DiMaggio and giving Mickey Mantle hookers in every city they visited when they were on the road.
Right, I was going to say.
I mean, these guys could get to these players. They're actually easier than a lot of people assume.
I was going to say, I worked in New York for a year back in 1981, and I got to know a guy named Howie Spira. And I don't know if anybody here remembers Howie Spira, but he was a stringer, basically. He was working for these different radio networks getting tape. And he got himself in good with Dave Winfield. And then Dave Winfield wasn't doing enough things for him that he wanted. So he blackmailed, basically, Dave Winfield, got him into trouble. And then it turned out Howie was doing all sorts of betting behind the scenes. I'm not sure if he spent time in jail. Have you heard of Howie Spira, though? You remember it was about...
Yeah, because he actually went to Steinbrenner.
Yeah, that's right.
And he tried to get money out of Steinbrenner, and then Steinbrenner got tied up in this whole mess.
Oh, I ran into this guy. I got to know him a little bit, and he was a very strange dude. And I've read that he's still around now, but it's kind of sad. But it was a black eye with the Yankees. I mean, it was not good. And I'm not sure how much betting was going on, but Howie was doing a lot of betting himself. So I'm not sure how much he was, trying to include the players.
Well, and that's the thing, too. I mean, like, baseball says, if you're, like, basically in league with gamblers, if you just talk about inside information to these gamblers, I mean, you could be suspended or banned for life for doing that sort of thing. That goes all the way back to the Black Sox scandal in 1990.
Well, that reminds me. I mean, can you imagine being shoeless Joe Jackson, and he actually hits .375 in the World Series?
Yeah.
So he actually doesn't really try to throw it.
But he knew about it.
He knew about it, and because he didn't say anything.
And he took the money.
Yeah, only $5,000 of the 20 he was promised.
Yeah.
I mean, the guy just got the raw end of every deal on that one.
Yeah.
Wow. So, Brian, anything else you want to share with us?
Well, when you're talking, too, about gambling in the United States, sports gambling, I mean, you have to understand, too, how big of a business it is. I mean, you think about the NFL, Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NHL, they're huge entities. They're billion-dollar businesses.
Yep.
Combined, they made about $25 billion last year, which is a lot of money.
In revenue.
But yet, if you look at the illegal, basically, underground gambling, sports gambling institution in this country, the estimates for how much money is being bet every year on sports in the United States alone is anywhere from $80 billion to $500 dollars.
Well, it's all a lot of, so much of it's in Las Vegas, but also back east in
well, Las Vegas actually only counts for about 1%.
Really?
Really?
$3 billion.
Shocking.
The rest of it is all underground. They busted up a gambling ring in North Texas that was dealing in $5 billion. Okay, so if you think the NFL has power over its teams because they make $10 billion. Guess how much money is being wagered illegally in this country, and then think about what that could do to these games.
Yeah, that's all spread
I think,
out.
$1 million player wouldn't fix a game because he makes $1 million. Well, then once you get rid of taxes, agent fees, and everything else, maybe he's only clearing $500,000 or less. Guys are betting that per game. So if you could come up to a player, if you had that kind of scratch, I mean, not everybody does, but you could come up to a player and say, look, I'll give you $250,000 to shave points in this game. That could be more more than some guys make in the entire
The
year.
only problem with that is in football is one guy, unless he's the quarterback or the running back, it's really hard to influence a game. I can see it in basketball and baseball, a pitcher certainly, but in football it's very difficult to do.
Yeah, an Aaron pass.
Difficult, but not impossible.
Not impossible, no, not impossible. Very
Wow.
interesting
I think
stuff.
again, that's that line of thinking where you're saying, well, it might not be able to happen, you can't.
Yeah.
That's the part that bothers me is the fact that no one's willing to make that step and go, hey, this is possible, because again, we can see it all around the world happening. Why do we think our sports here are so pure and clean and free of such corruption?
Well, I think it's because when you watch it, when you watch
we see
the
how
sport,
corrupt, unfortunately, the rest of America seems to be in every other aspect of it.
it's got to be good
Our
actors.
life. Why do we think sports are pure and free from
Good point.
Man, well, Brian, I got to go out and get this book. I mean, if I popped up Amazon right now, I could just pick it up just like that.
Oh, most definitely, yeah. Larceny Games Fixes In. Both are on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever good books are sold. Hopefully it's sitting there.
And how much?
What's that?
How much?
At Amazon, Larceny Games is probably about $13-14, I think.
Okay, I'll bet you that. No. how long did it take you to write these books?
Well, Larceny Games took about 3 years to put together, but that's only because it's based on all these FBI files.
Wow.
And I obtained over 400 files. Basically, every file the FBI had related to what they call sports bribery, which is point shaving, game fixing, or race fixing, even in horse racing. I obtained every one of them.
How'd you get a hold of this stuff?
Available.
Brian, how'd you get a hold of all this information? How did you get a hold of all this information?
Freedom of Information Act.
Ah,
How to learn how to work the system. And
matter of public record.
Once I did,
For horse racing, they threw little sugar cubes in front of the horse. Okay, Brian, stay with us if you want to go into some other stuff that we're going to be talking about. We're going to cut to our second commercial break. Again, the theme is NFL coaches. Vince Lombardi, we all know him, took the Packers to Super Bowl I victory. Who was the opposing team's head coach? The first three callers with the correct answer win a free 3-day, 2-night stay at the Lighthouse Resort. Call 888-660-4495 to answer this question. Vern's got a smile on his face. He knows this one, too.
68 cross power trap.
There you go. They laughed.
Okay, Vince, that was a hint. Vince Lombardi took the Packers to Super Bowl I victory. Who was the opposing team's head coach? 888.
He didn't have enough of those.
Oh, he
not the first one.
Here's a good hint. He was one of the most hated men in
Really?
Oakland. The
Oh, in
Raider
Oakland, yeah,
fans,
oh, for sure.
Raider fans hated this guy.
NFL fans were not for long in this.
Yeah.
Or, I don't know if you said that or someone
No,
else
he
said that.
did.
He did? Okay.
Not for, well, maybe it was Jerry Glanville. I don't know. One
Probably.
of the two.
Yeah, I think it was Glanville. You're right. Make sure to include your or no. He said, he goes, that was a good call. That was a good call. He's telling the referee. Yeah, make sure to include your name and your email address. Don't touch that dial. Sports Econ 101 will be right back. Well, okay, you guys are 2 for 2. I can just tell you know the answer.
Good old Henry Stram.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, he was a good coach.
Packers just too too tough.
I loved him as a
First
color
two.
announcer too. He was terrific on the Monday night game with Jack Buck. He was on national network TV radio for. He and Jack Buck did the network radio game of the week on Monday night from mid 70s until probably the early 90s. About 15 years, 16 years.
I'm still used to Howard Cosell.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, how many people listen to the radio as opposed to watching Monday Night Football?
Who's the coach? Who's coach of the Raiders in the second Super Bowl?
Second Super Bowl was John Roush.
John Roush.
that
Okay.
would-
Yeah,
that would be a
and,
good question.
And
Who was the first one?
Al Davis, well, that was the first Super Bowl win.
First Super Bowl.
And then John Madden was the second Super
Yeah,
Bowl.
Madden was-
They lost the first one to Green Bay.
Oh, I see.
But John Roush was actually, wasn't so much fired, but he was, after the 68 season, they lost in the championship game to the Jets, and he and Al Davis didn't get along. You know, Al Davis is,
Tough guy to get over.
and then you've got to remember, John Madden was only 33 when he was hired.
Mm-hmm.
He was elevated, he was an
He's
assistant.
offensive line coach, right?
That's right,
Yeah.
He was big enough to beat the offensive.
Yeah.
He was a good one. He played in the pros for a couple of years. With
Did
the
he
with the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah,
Wow.
tore up his knee.
Out of San Luis Obispo.
Out of San Luis Obispo. But he's
Right.
from
Jefferson High School.
Yeah, he's
San
a
Francisco.
San Francisco guy, Daly
Matt?
City.
Yeah.
But he went to school at Cal Poly, San Luis Obispo, and he
Mhm.
coached at Hancock College in Santa Maria. That was his first job.
That's in California.
Yeah,
Okay.
right near San Luis Obispo. Yeah,
All right, you guys ready?
too much information for you.
That's
Too much
too
information.
much. Okay, here we go. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Vern Glenn, the man of few words, and Bruce McGowan.
It's nice to be here.
Okay, and we cut to the second commercial commercial break. We asked this trivia question. Vince Lombardi took the Packers to Super Bowl I victory. Who was the opposing team's head coach? Brian, you want to answer that for us?
Yes, it was Hank Stram.
Hank
Yes.
Stram. You knew that.
And Hank Stram was also perhaps suspected for shaving points while he was with the Chiefs.
Really?
Ah.
Is that right?
I don't know. They kept winning.
Him, Len Dawson, and Johnny Robinson, all three of them.
Not Len
Wow.
Dawson.
No, really? Lenny
Oh,
Dawson?
that's right. Lenny Dawson got in it. There was some suspicion in a lot of
Some
during,
shenanigans.
during the Super Bowl week. The Super Bowl
Super Bowl
when,
IV.
that's right. When
No,
Kansas City was playing Minnesota, there was a lot of talk that he had some kind of relationship with gamblers. I think, wasn't it, Brian?
Yeah, he was in, him and many other actually NFL quarterbacks were in the personal notebook of a gambler named Dice Dawson, no relation to Len. But, they suspected, actually had FBI files relating to them investigating Len and, like, say, Johnny Robinson for shaving points.
And the thing about Len Dawson,
Robinson was actually tied to another gambler out of Baton Rouge
really?
who was probably working with him while he was going to LSU, if you believe.
Well, the thing about Len Dawson, I got to know him fairly well. I'm not saying he's above suspicion, but I'd have a hard time believing he was a guy who did that. But then again,
What about Ed Podolak? He was clean, wasn't he?
I worked with
Bucky
I
Buchanan?
worked with Ed Podolak's daughter at KGO Radio for a while, Laura Podolak. Yeah,
Is that right?
nice guy, and Laura was a great editor over there. But Ed Podolak was, man, talk about a tough dude.
Yeah.
Oof.
I love
Remember when
Bucky
Joe
Buchanan.
Namath had to sell his shares out of Bachelor's 3, the bar?
That's
because,
right. Because
of the organized crime element. The guys,
that's right.
yeah, hoodlums that were
And
hanging out there.
And he briefly retired. He actually was going to walk away from the game. They had a picture of him on the cover of Sports Illustrated with tears coming out of his eyes, saying, I'm walking away from the game. Of course, he didn't walk away from
Broadway Joe.
Because they also thought Broadway Joe might have been suspect for throwing the games here and there, too.
Yeah.
There was a lot of suspicion in those
Jeez,
in the 60s with
sounds
the
like almost
NFL.
everybody was in it.
And the AFL was one of the most dirty leagues that ever existed in terms of potentially game fixing.
Well,
Well,
you go back to baseball, Federal League, and those back in the early 1900s.
I think that what Brian says about the AFL is probably true because the AFL was always fighting for parity with the NFL, and the top four teams in the AFL were as easily as good as the NFL. The Raiders, the Chiefs, the Jets, and maybe the Houston Oilers. They were all as good as any of the top teams in the NFL.
1960-61, the Oilers were very good.
Well, not in the early 60s. They weren't good. They were just starting to come into being.
I thought the Oilers were in the very first AFL championship
were.
game in
What's that?
1960.
In 1960 with George Blanda.
Oh, I'm talking about later, though, when they played. I would say
Later on they were terrible.
when they first started, the AFL was not good. It got to be much better in the mid-60s because they started rating the NFL and also getting some of the top draft picks.
Sort of like the USFL when they did that.
Yeah, but they just they kind of did, but they just didn't have it because they're going to the summer and it was tough. They were getting guys past their prime.
Okay, so it's interesting. We're talking about sports or rigged, and I got on this. Mike Tomlin fined for quote interference $100,000.
$100,000.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, he stepped out. In front of the
$100,000
guy.
for NFL charities.
What do you think, Brian? Was he involved there? Maybe. He says he wasn't.
That's maybe pushing.
I know that one.
One thing I argue about, and a lot of people, because I got this label as being like the nation's biggest conspiracy theorist in terms of.
You come on now, Brian.
I believe the NFL fixes their own games or has
Really?
their own games.
Why would they do that?
How or why they?
No, why? And that's a rhetorical
Media.
question. Is it because
I believe they do it because to maintain interest in their sport.
Okay.
The NFL especially generates $6 billion a year from television alone, which just basically pays every player's salary in the league.
But why do you?
The Super Bowl's been really good the last few years.
Yeah, but why would you have to maintain interest in the sport by fixing games? I mean, the games are fun to watch as it is.
That's because
I
they're being
don't
fixed.
think that normal randomness would keep people from paying attention to it. I think after time you would develop dynasties. I think you would develop certain teams that are always over and above. And I think they hide behind this idea of parity because if they do want to influence a game, and I'm not saying every game's fixed. I'm not saying it's professional wrestling. That's not what I argue. When they see certain storylines, when they see certain athletes succeed, and suddenly, like in a Tim Tebow way, they transcend the game, then I think the NFL is willing to help them along. I think, and I can point to evidence. I mean, like when the Packers went 15-1 just a couple years ago, and Aaron Rodgers really emerged as a big deal. The Packers went 11 games without a holding penalty called against them.
Wow.
Now, that's something that should not happen in the NFL. You find holding on almost every other play, if not every play, is something
Vince Lombardi, he taught him.
You shouldn't be able to go 11 games without a holding call against you.
What about Tim? I got to
These
ask
are the
you.
sort of things, and the thing about it, and what I try to point out to people is, here's the kicker of it all: is it is not illegal for the NFL, the NBA, any league to fix their own games. There's no crime that would be committed if they decided to do this.
all entertainment.
Yeah. But I mean, I was going to ask you. You mentioned Tim Tebow. Why? My question is, why isn't Tim Tebow playing somewhere? The guy's a terrific talent. Yeah, he's kind of a freak of nature. But I mean, you have any thoughts about that?
Well, because maybe he isn't. He actually wasn't a talent. He was just kind of a superstar. He was kind of maybe the Miley Cyrus of the NFL. She doesn't really have talent in singing, but she can draw attention. You know what I mean? And the same with Tebow. Maybe they used him. Maybe they pushed the Broncos. They allowed the NFL pushed the Broncos into the playoffs to keep Tebow's star up there, and then they basically used him up and threw him away like they do a lot of boxers.
Wow, wouldn't that be horrible if you found out years from now that run that he had the Broncos on to like win games in like eye-popping fashion
and
at the
didn't even
very
know it.
wow.
I just don't understand a guy that gets his team in the playoffs. And I remember seeing a game at Oakland where he had some incredible runs on the read option. Why this guy isn't even on a team? It doesn't make sense to me.
I mean, that begs certain questions. I mean, has the guy been blackballed? What happened to him? Because if he basically made the Broncos a playoff team.
Yeah.
How can he not do that on Jacksonville or anybody else who's struggling and suffering with some of these lousy backup quarterbacks? I think there's legitimate questions we can ask about the NBA, about the NFL, about all sports really in the United States, and wonder how much this has really been manipulated for entertainment purposes and how much of it is true athletic ability.
I was going to say with Tim Tebow, maybe it's because he's too good to be true. He's such a goody two-shoe. He's so religious. Maybe they didn't like that.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think that's what it is. But Brian, I tell you now that we're talking to you, I'm going to think there's a conspiracy out there for every game I watch. I mean, it's hard not to.
That's the hard part is to say, well, you know, it's the cry of the losing gambler, I say, is it was fixed. I knew what was going to happen. Therefore, it's fixed. I mean,
I'll never forget, Brian. I went to a game once, a college game, and Cal beat Illinois on the final play of the game. It was a fluke play, and my friend's dad was sitting next to us, and he gets up and he's laughing. He's from Cal, and he was happy, but he's going, fix, fix, fix.
Wow.
You know, it's funny. We were talking about Mike Tomlin getting fined $100,000. Do you remember Bill Belichick on the Spygate from the Patriots?
Oh yeah,
Oh,
He
yeah.
got fined $500,000.
Wow.
Now that I think.
Did the team pick that up, though? The team picked that up, I think. The Patriots paid for that.
I don't remember.
It all goes to a charity fund anyway.
Yeah.
At the end of the year.
and here's the thing with Spygate and Belichick. I don't think they stopped doing that.
No, I don't think so
I think
either.
they're doing it still today, and they're getting away with it.
Yeah. How about the
guys
Saints?
from Texas recently come out and say that, and they've won quite a few games by major second half comebacks. Which, if you're videotaping your opponent's coaching signals and you analyze them at halftime, well, then you'd utilize them in the second half, which would make some of these comebacks, like the comeback against the Broncos, a lot easier if you knew when they were going to blitz and when they weren't going to blitz.
How about the
That's
Saints?
the thing that bothers me with Spygate. The thing that really bothers me with
What's
Spygate
that?
is everybody pins this on Belichick. Tom Brady, if they were using the opposing signals from the defense, Tom Brady made a career out of using those signals to his advantage.
Stealing signs.
Brady, nobody. And that guy is just as guilty as Belichick if that was really going on for 10 plus years.
So you think everybody does it? It's just a matter of who gets caught, right?
Or almost everybody does it.
Speaking of the Patriots, how many games have they won in the final seconds on freak and weird plays this year? About 4 or 5. So there's something to look at right there. Anyway.
You were going to say about the Saints?
Yeah, Brian. What do you know about the Saints allegedly bugging the visiting coach's box? Because that caused Sean Payton.
The interesting thing with that is that's one of those stories that like crops up and then disappears and no one talks about. No one ever bothered to look further into that. You know, there's other things like Sam Hurd for Chicago Bears here got busted trying to buy $400,000 worth of cocaine and marijuana a week, and yet nobody talked about that story. It just like disappeared. I mean, there's a lot of things that bothers me with the sports media and the fact that they don't cover this sort of corruption. Again, they don't get into the game-fixing aspect of things like I think they should. They should be paying attention to. I think there's a lot of that ESPN mentality that really keeps this stuff down and almost covers it up and willfully covers it up because so many of these sports outlets, the ESPNs, the Fox Sports, they're so invested in professional sports and even college sports that they can't really afford to have too many scandals and look too deeply into the corruption within these leagues because they're shooting themselves in the foot investment-wise.
Well, hey, Brian, let me ask you.
$1 billion and then turn around and say, oh, they're fixing all these.
Hey, Brian, let me ask you, because you're talking about soccer. This is one of the things I wanted to bring up was the U.S. in the World Cup. That, you know, here they draw this punishing group of Ghana and Portugal and Germany, and you're wondering, like, I mean, that could be a fix too, right?
I wrote an article for Sports on Earth how I think it was fixed.
In order
It just was published yesterday.
in order to screw the U.S. or in order to put the U.S. in position to do something that nobody sees coming.
No, I think to screw them.
Okay.
I think if you look at Brazil got a really easy draw, which happens to be the host country, which of course benefit Brazil and all of FIFA, as long as the host country doesn't get kicked out right away. I think you look at Switzerland and France, which is the number 1 and number 2 guys within FIFA in terms of the president and vice president, hail from those 2 countries. They got a very easy draw. And then places like England, the United States, especially the United States, because I don't think we're very much loved anywhere else in this world, they got horrible draws. And I think if you watch, and you can see the video of it, the actual draw, the guy's hands who's pulling out the names, you can never see his hands.
He's just reading.
He pulls out a name. I mean, it could very easily have been fixed in front of literally a worldwide audience.
Wow.
Yeah. And nobody can do it.
And maybe one of the reasons we don't want to know about this, too, is when we go to the games as adults, we kind of revert to being kids again, and the world is corrupt enough as it is. So when we go to the games, we want to think it's sacrosanct when we go out and watch these great athletes play.
I think that's exactly it. It is entertainment, and I don't think a lot of sports fans, and that's one of the questions I asked in the fixes and when I wrote it. In fact, the very first sentence was, well, why do you care about sports? Because I think if you look at sports as a business, because they are big businesses. I mean, even college, the NCAA is a huge multi-billion-dollar business. If you look at them that way, then this sort of corruption isn't surprising, and it isn't shocking. It's actually expected, unfortunately.
Okay, Brian, don't burst my bubble here, but when my son was 12 years old and playing Little League and his team lost 10 in a row, was that fixed?
I mean, there's money on the other side.
Hey, you know something, Brian? My dad thinks these Powerballs and these lotteries, my dad thinks those systems are fixed.
Well, you know, the thing is, I mean, if you look at stuff like even the lottery, like you say, the question is, can you fix it? And the answer almost undoubtedly in all these cases is yeah, you could fix it. But the question is, not can you do it, but the question is, has somebody done it? And when there's that much money on the line, be it in sports, be it in the lottery, be it in, getting a gaming license for an Indian casino or whatever, when there's that much money on the line, unfortunately, corruption always seems to follow to ensure more money is made off of that than is normally possible.
Well, that's been my question, like we're elections. Let's say for president, right? Each district reports such and such. I mean, who's to really say who really won? You know what I mean? You could just say, oh yeah, we just popular vote or
just look back to 2000, or if you want to go way back, look back to 18. I mean, this is going way back. 1876 was the tainted election where Rutherford Hayes was called just fraudulency.
Yeah,
he was out after 4 years.
Yeah, okay. How much did Kennedy beat Nixon by? It wasn't much.
100,000.
Yeah.
Okay, guys, we're going to cut to our third and final commercial break. Brian Toohey, who wrote The Fix Is In, and what was the other one? Larceny
Games.
Larceny Games. Thank you very much for joining us. Here is the third question. Again, we're talking NFL coaches. What coach started his pro career as a linebacker for the Bills and then coached the Browns, Chiefs, Redskins, and Chargers, but couldn't get any recognition because he kept losing championship games? The first 3 callers with the correct answer win a free 3-day, 2-night stay at the Lighthouse Resort. Call 888-660-4495. Answer this question. What coach started his pro career as a linebacker for the Bills and then coached the Browns, Chiefs, Redskins, and Chargers, but couldn't get any recognition?
As a head coach. He was a head coach.
That's right. But he kept losing in championship games. Don't touch that dial. Sports Econ 101. We'll be right back with closing comments.
Browns, Chiefs, Redskins, and Chargers.
And he was a linebacker with the Bills.
And he was a linebacker with the Bills.
So it must have been back in the 60s.
Hang on. Wow.
I need to know the answer before I go. That one bothers me.
Okay, stay with
me. Jack Purdy played with the Rams.
Oh, we just got to save this file here.
Let's see.
Hey, Brian, this has been good. Thank you very much.
Good stuff, Brian.
Thanks for, sorry it took so long for us to look up.
Oh, yeah, no problem at all. Thanks for being flexible with the date. I mean, somebody had saved this file.
Who's a head coach of 5 different teams, though?
Yeah. I'm trying to think who that would be.
Unless it was like an interim coach a couple of times.
And he was probably a decent player, but not a big name player, right? Is that a hint?
Listen, I gave you guys 2 minutes before. Forget it.
I think it's Marty Schottenheimer. He was a linebacker for the Bills back in the War Memorial Coliseum days.
Okay.
And look at who
he played with the Browns. He coached the Browns.
Coached the Browns.
Coached the
Chiefs.
Coached
the Redskins.
I think that's it.
I think that's it.
Yeah. Yeah. He got he had some great regular seasons, but they couldn't finish off do it in the playoffs. They always lose in the playoffs.
Just wait till you hear the answer. Okay, you guys ready?
Yes.
All right.
Good man, too. Schottenheimer.
Here
Okay.
we go. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Vern Glenn
Yep.
and Bruce McGowan.
Oh, yes.
And when we cut to the third commercial break, we asked this trivia question. What coach started his pro career as a linebacker for the Bills and then coached the Browns, Chiefs, Redskins, and Chargers, but couldn't get any recognition because he kept losing championship games? Anybody?
Well, Vernon had a good.
Yeah, we
He's got it.
spoke off
Yeah.
we spoke off camera, off mic. We
Vernon
think
got it.
we think it's Marty Schottenheimer.
It is Marty
Yeah,
Schottenheimer.
there you go.
Excellent.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that poor guy he kept losing the big one.
And he had some great teams, too.
Nice guy,
Good
super
guy.
nice. I interviewed him the night before the Bills Chiefs AFC Championship game. This would have been
Early 90s.
1993.
93 or 94. Yeah.
Yeah, it was.
When he had Montana.
Yeah, it was Joe Montana's
Yeah.
last game,
Yeah.
and then it was
The Bills won 4.
O.J. Simpson's last game as an announcer for NBC.
Oh, my gosh. Wow.
Yeah.
A star-crossed night.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. Joe and OJ won
Yeah.
somehow.
Well, maybe they can get OJ back.
I saw Joe the other night with Jennifer.
You know,
Ah,
she's the
yeah.
best thing that ever happened to him. Boy, I mean, she's the smart cookie. She really is.
And she's sharp because I went to interview her, and then she goes, "No, let's get Joe in here."
Uh-huh.
And
Did Joe have anything to say, though? That's the thing.
Yeah,
He's a great
he
guy.
did, but
Yeah.
she was smart. She
Yeah.
knew that if I had asked Joe any football questions, because they weren't allowing any
Oh.
at this function, that we'd cut her right out and then just
Wow.
go right to Joe later on
Interesting.
Good
on the
point.
soundbite.
Okay. Guys, thanks for joining me again. That's for the day. How many NCAA basketball players does it take to change a light bulb? Only one, but he gets car, money, and 3 credit hours for doing
There you
it.
go.
And Bobby Knight said it was fun playing the Chinese team during the 1980 Olympics, but after an hour, we wanted to play them again.
Oh, very funny.
Tune in next week to Sports Econ 101. We're going to be discussing sports topics from a business perspective and giving away more vacations for answering sports trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm your host, Edward Brown. By the way, thank you, Brian Toohey, for joining us. That was excellent about the fix is in.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see you next week.
Good night, America.
So long. Good. Okay,
All right.
that was one. We don't have any guests for the next one, so we'll